How did orchestral maneuvers in the dark go from the darker mood of organization to one of the most luminous electronic albums of the early 80s? How did a band still known for strange machines, minimal stage presentation and songs about power stations, war and industry suddenly make an album that felt emotional, spiritual, and almost architectural in scale? That is the story behind Architecture and Morality. Released in late 1981, it was not simply the album that gave OMD some of their biggest hits. It was the moment where their experimental instincts, melodic gift, and fascination with sound all came together. It was electronic pop, but not in the obvious sense. It had machines, but it also had space, sadness, memory, and something close to grandeur. By the time OMD began moving towards Architecture and Morality, they had already travelled a long way in a very short time. Only a few years earlier, Andy McCluskey and Paul Humphreys had been building songs from tape machines, cheap keyboards, and a very clear sense that pop music did not have to follow the usual rules. Their first album still had the feeling of a group inventing itself as it went along. It was minimal, awkward in the best possible way, and full of ideas that sat somewhere between post-punk, electronic experiment, and melodic pop. Then came Organisation in 1980, a darker and more austere record. It contained Enola Gay, which became a major breakthrough, but the album around it was colder, greyer, and more shadowed. That success created a problem as much as an opportunity. OMD could have followed Enola Gay with something bright, simple, and direct. Instead, they went somewhere more ambitious. They were not interested in just becoming a singles machine. They wanted to stretch the emotional and sonic language of electronic music. This is important because Architecture and Morality was not made by abandoning experiment for pop. It was made by finding a way to make experiment feel emotional. The lineup around this period was also expanding. OMD was still built around McCluskey and Humphreys, but Malcolm Holmes had become an important part of the sound on percussion and drums, while Martin Cooper was also part of the wider group picture. During the making of the album, there were shifts and interruptions within that lineup, with Cooper temporarily leaving and later returning. It adds to the sense of a band in transition, not quite the small electronic duo of the early days, but not yet a settled pop institution either. The recording of Architecture and Morality took place across several locations. Some of the work was connected to OMD's own gramophone suite in Liverpool, while much of the album was recorded at the Manor in Oxfordshire, with mixing at Mayfair Studios in London. Producer Mike Howlett helped shape the album's broader sound and direction, while engineer Richard Manwaring played a crucial role in translating those ideas into the album's distinctive textures and atmosphere. What makes the album so distinctive is that its making began not only with songs, but with textures. Their key instrument was the Mellotron. By 1981, the Mellotron was hardly new technology. It was a strange mechanical keyboard that played back strips of tape, often with choir, string, and orchestral sounds. In progressive rock, it had already been used to create grandeur, but OMD used it differently. They did not use it to imitate an orchestra in a traditional way. They used it for atmosphere, for ghostly colour, for something that felt half human and half machine. That was crucial to the album. The Mellotron gave Architecture and Morality a voice that was not quite synthetic, but not fully natural either. The choir sounds feel distant, almost sacred, as if they are coming from a church, a memory, or an old broadcast. This is one reason the record still sounds so unusual. It does not have the clean, futuristic shine people often associate with early new wave or synth pop. It feels older, stranger, and more weathered. The influence of religious music also played an important role. Andy McCluskey has spoken about the emotional power of religious music, not from a position of personal faith, but from a fascination with why people need belief, ritual, and transcendence. That idea sits right inside the album. Architecture and Morality is not a religious record in a simple sense, but it often sounds as if it is trying to understand the emotional architecture of belief. Even the title reflects that tension. Architecture and Morality was suggested by Martha Ladley, formerly of Martha and the Muffins, and it was connected to David Watkins' book Morality and Architecture. For OMD, the phrase took on its own meaning. Architecture could suggest structure, technology, machines, and design. Morality could suggest the human part, the emotional weight, the questions beneath the surface. That is a very OMD idea. The machine and the feeling, the system and the soul. The album opens with The New Stone Age, and it is a fascinating choice. If anyone expected the album to begin with a smooth electronic pop statement, OMD did the opposite. The track is jagged, raw, and almost deliberately ugly. There is guitar in the sound, but not in a heroic rock way. It feels nervous and abrasive, as if the band are warning the listener not to get too comfortable. As an opening move, it matters. It says that Architecture and Morality is not simply a beautiful album. It has edges. It has awkwardness. It still belongs to the same restless band that had written Electricity, Red Frame, White Light, and Enola Gay. They had become more successful, but they had not become safe. Then the album begins to open out. She's Leaving is one of those OMD songs where sadness is built into the shape of the melody. It is not dramatic in an obvious way, but it carries a quiet ache. The arrangement has space around it, which gives the song room to breathe. That use of space becomes one of the album's great strengths. OMD were learning that electronic music did not have to be crowded to feel powerful. Sometimes the air between the sounds was just as important as the notes themselves. Souvenir was the first song written for the album, and it remains one of OMD's most beautiful singles. Paul Humphreys' vocal gives it a different character from the McCluskey-led songs. There is a softness to it, a kind of emotional distance, as if the song is already remembering itself while it plays. What is remarkable about Souvenir is how little it seems to do in conventional pop terms, yet how strongly it lingers. It does not push too hard, it floats. The choral textures, the melody, the restraint, all of it creates the sense of a memory preserved in sound. It became a hit, but it does not sound designed by committee. It sounds like a private feeling that somehow reached the charts. That is one of the album's miracles. Seelan takes the record somewhere even more spacious. The title itself connects back to the Wirral landscape and the world around the band's origins, but musically it feels larger than geography. It is one of the tracks that makes Architecture and Morality feel like an album, rather than a collection of singles. It stretches the mood. It gives the record its horizon. This is where the making of the album becomes inseparable from its meaning. OMD were not just writing songs and adding electronic sounds on top. They were building an environment. The placement of sounds, the echo, the use of choral textures, the balance between rhythm and atmosphere. All of it gives the album its architecture. Then comes Joan of Arc. On paper, the idea is almost absurd for a pop single in 1981. A song about a 15th century French martyr, made by an electronic band from the Wirral, released into a chart world moving quickly towards bright new pop. But OMD had always found pop subjects in unusual places. They had already written about telephone boxes, power stations, war and industrial systems. Joan of Arc was not really a departure from that thinking. It was another example of OMD finding emotion inside history and symbolism. Joan of Arc has grandeur. but it avoids becoming heavy. The melody carries the drama, while the arrangement gives it a sense of ceremony. Again, the Mellotron and choral atmosphere are central. It feels devotional but also distant, like a story seen through mist. And then OMD went even further with Joan of Arc, Maid of Orleans. This is one of the strangest hit singles of the early 80s. Its rhythm has a waltz-like movement, giving it a stately, almost processional feel. The famous lead sound has often been heard almost like a bagpipe, but it comes from the band's use and treatment of Mellotron sounds. That detail matters because it shows how inventive OMD were being with texture. They were not simply choosing presets, they were bending old technology into new emotional shapes. Maid of Orleans became a major European hit, and in Germany it became especially huge. Yet it is not an obvious pop record. It has a long instrumental presence, an unusual historical subject, and an atmosphere closer to ritual than radio formula. That it worked commercially says something about the moment. In 1981 and 82, the pop charts could still make room for records that were genuinely strange. Architecture and Morality also contains pieces that point towards the future. Georgia, with its uneasy atmosphere and political undertones, suggests that OMD were still interested in the wider world beyond romance and melody. The beginning and the end closes the album with ambiguity rather than triumph. It does not feel like a grand finale. It feels like the light slowly going out. That decision gives the album part of its lasting power. It does not end by resolving everything. It leaves you inside the atmosphere. When Architecture and Morality was released on 6 November 1981, it became OMD's biggest album to that point. It reached number 3 in the UK album chart and produced 3 major singles: Souvenir, Joan of Arc and Maid of Orleans, all of which reached the UK top 5. It was a remarkable achievement for a record this unusual, but success did not make the album ordinary. That is what separates it from many other breakthrough records. Sometimes when experimental groups become popular, the strangeness gets polished away. Here, the opposite happened. OMD became more successful by making a record that was more atmospheric, more ambitious, and more mysterious than expected. The reviews at the time were not all as reverent as later opinion would become. Like many albums that later gained classic status, Architecture and Morality had to grow in reputation. Over time, it came to be seen not simply as a strong orchestral maneuvers in the dark album, but as one of the key electronic pop records of the early 80s. And it is easy to hear why. What OMD achieved here was a balance very few groups managed. The album is melodic without being conventional, experimental without being cold, emotional without being sentimental. It carries the memory of post-punk austerity, but also points towards the more expansive possibilities of electronic pop. For OMD themselves, it created another problem. How do you follow an album that succeeds both artistically and commercially? The answer in their case was not to repeat it. Instead, they moved towards Dazzle Ships, a far more difficult and fragmented record, full of radio signals, political unease and experimental interruption. In hindsight, the seeds of Dazzle Ships are already present on Architecture and Morality. You can hear them in the atmosphere, in the use of non-traditional textures, in the interest in sound as information, memory and signal. But on Architecture and Morality, those elements are still held inside warmth and melody. Dazzle Ships would pull some of them further apart. That makes Architecture and Morality feel like a perfect crossing point. It stands between the early minimal OMD and the more radical ambitions that followed. It is not the beginning of the band, and it is not the end of their experimental period. It is the moment where everything briefly aligned. Listening now, what strikes me most is not simply the songs, though the songs are extraordinary. It is the patience of the record, the confidence to let sounds hang in the air, the refusal to explain too much. the way machines are used not to sound futuristic, but to suggest memory, distance, and longing. That may be why the album still feels so human. It does not try to prove that electronic music can imitate traditional emotion. It shows that electronic music can create its own kind of emotion. Something colder on the surface perhaps, but deeper because of the space around it. Architecture and Morality is often called OMD's masterpiece, and for once the word does not feel exaggerated. It is an album built from contrasts: pop and experiment, technology and spirit, structure and feeling. More than 40 years later, it still sounds like a place you can enter. Not just a record from 1981, but a world of its own. That is why it remains one of the great achievements of early electronic pop, and why OMD never sounded quite like anyone else.